I'm very excited to be joined by Moira Ritter, who is the Homes.com California housing reporter, very much of an expert on the topic that we're looking at this week, which is there a housing emergency? Moira, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So, three simple questions for you that I know a lot of our readers are interested in. First, are home prices too high?
Well, it depends who you ask. If you're selling your house, certainly not. If you want to buy a house, probably. It's been a few years of really rampant upticks in home prices. The story's starting to change a little bit now. We're seeing some movement. For one, sellers are so used to being able to sell their homes at really high prices that they're not willing to budge. So they're still listing houses at really high prices. Buyers, however, aren't willing or able to meet them there. So you've got a little gridlock that's starting to take place between buyers and sellers. Homes are sitting on the market for longer, and that's has yet to play out. So we don't really know. That could make home prices come down. It's starting to happen in some places. If you look in the South, in states like Texas, Florida, where there was a lot of new homes built during the pandemic years, there's a glut of supply. Glut might be a little hyperbolic, but there are more houses. So sellers and buyers, the balance is a little off. Sellers are lowering their prices. Prices are falling in some of those markets. So ask a buyer in the Northeast, they'd probably say, yeah, the prices are too high. Ask a seller in the Northeast, they'd say, no, I'm getting my equity. I'm getting what my house is worth. If you look to the South, it's a different story.
And how about out there in California?
Prices are always really high here. So it's a little bit of an anomaly. California kind of operates on its own, as Derek Thompson and Ezra Klein put so eloquently in their book Abundance. They kind of did a case study of California, which, as they put it, is sort of the ground zero for the housing crisis as we've seen it develop in the last few years. So there's hyper regulation here. Obviously, prices are high to begin with. I live in LA and everything is really expensive, and that's just kind of the way it is.
All right. Well, good to know at least that supply and demand, as I learned in college, remains a force of nature. Question number two. Everyone seems to be hoping that the Fed will cut rates, maybe a quarter point, maybe a half a point. If the Fed cuts rates as expected, how much does that fix things?
It's a really complicated question. It's probably the most talked about topic in my office and with sources, but it's a big misconception. A lot of home buyers and borrowers think that when the Fed cuts rates, they're instantly going to get mortgage relief. The mortgage market is going to go nuts. Everything is going to get more affordable. And that's not exactly how it works. The Federal Reserve doesn't set mortgage rates. The mortgage market is actually influenced by the bond market. So when the Fed cuts rates, investors react and markets react, and that has a ripple effect. So that's why you would see a change in the mortgage market. Right now, what sources are telling me is that we're having a bit of a divergence from historical norms. So on the short term, the overnight interest rate that the Fed sets, that is going to come down. It has to because of the economic weakness that we're seeing right now. But in the long term, investors are still really fearful and uncertain about what's to come. We don't know where inflation is going. There's so much uncertainty around tariffs, around this administration's policy. And so long term interest rates, thinking the bond market and then the 30-year fixed rate mortgage, people are more uncertain about that. They're not as willing to bring those rates down. If you bring the rates down and inflation continues, you're not going to get a return on that investment. So it's really an open-ended question right now. I like to say uncertainty is the word of the year. Every time I talk to a source, that is the word that they use. So I think we're starting to come out of the woods. If the Fed cuts rates, it would be good. It certainly wouldn't be bad for the mortgage market, but it's not the end all be all.
Yeah, and you point out that a lot of current homeowners feel locked into lower mortgage rates. The data suggests 85% enjoy a rate 5% or below. Even if the feds were to cut rates, and even if it gets passed through to the mortgage market, that drops it to what, 6%? And if 85% are at 5%, they're still kind of locked in.
Yeah, so I was actually reading an analysis by JP Morgan yesterday, and they seem to think you would need between 100 and 250 basis point difference in mortgage rates to see a real movement in the market. Um, so that's one piece. On the other hand, you have people, Lawrence Yun, he's the chief economist at the National Association of Realtors. And for years, he's kind of been forecasting that at a certain point, life takes over, people have kids, they get new jobs, you have to move on. So there's certainly some of that movement that's happening, but for the lock-in effect to really break the golden handcuffs, as they call them, for that to end, you would need a significant drop in mortgage rates.
Okay, question number three. Treasury Secretary Bessent says that the administration may soon declare a housing emergency, and liberal economist, Nobel Prize winning Paul Krugman agrees there's a housing emergency, though they otherwise differ on the president. How might the declaration of a housing emergency help home builders, home buyers in California, where you closely observe, and around the country?
Well, I think you put it this way earlier really eloquently. It's a lot easier to call something an emergency than it is to fix an emergency. The issue with housing is it's a really hyper local issue. I mean, look at LA specifically. It's the largest county in the country, 88 cities, 88 different leadership bodies that you're working with, and every single you have the county, but every single individual city approaches housing its own way. And so we're rebuilding from the fires. The Palisades in Altadena have very different approaches to how they're doing this, and part of that is hyper local regulation. So when the federal government tries to step in, there are things they can do. They can incentivize home builders, they can incentivize home buyers with tax credits and the like. But as far as the reach that they have, it's a little bit limited because you are kind of confined to what municipalities and states and cities are deciding to do. Um, as far as this administration, they could certainly make some trade-offs. There's been a lot of talk about the labor force and immigrants, how they contribute to construction. So if the Trump administration wanted to lay off of some of its deportations, some economists and housing experts have suggested that could be a fix. The other piece is the tariffs. A lot of the materials that we use to build houses, furnish houses, all of the things that go into making a home, a lot of those are now taxed. And that's going to put pressure on consumer prices. It's going to make things harder for builders and buyers alike. So, if they exempted some of those items from tariffs, that would be one way. But like I said, it would be a trade off. So,
Well, your housing beat is may soon be front and center in the national conversation. How can readers or listeners or watchers here follow your work?
absolutely. All my stories published on homes.com. We have a news site. It's almost a year old, so we've been working hard. And I am always on LinkedIn posting stories, ideas, insights. So you can see me there. It's just my name.
We'll include links to both. Moira, thank you for taking the time, and good luck with the reporting.
Thanks for having me, Bruce.